Hello and welcome to the interview here on France 24. France's far-right National Front has changed its language to broaden its appeal. Gone are the Holocaust-mocking puns, the talks of racial inequality, and the apologia for the wartime Vichy regime. Party leader Marine Le Pen sounds like a modern politician. She uses different words from her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, who often came across as a reactionary during his 3 decades at the party's helm. But, as my guest demonstrates, the underlying message is still the same. Cécile Alduy is professor of French literature at Stanford University in the US. She's just published Marine Le Pen, Prise au mot, co-authored with Stéphane Vanish. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I suppose we could roughly translate prise au mot as caught on words, couldn't we?
Right, absolutely.
Right.
That would be a good translation.
So about half of your book is a linguistic analysis of this new discourse from the National Front. You talk a lot about the double language of Marine Le Pen. Just tell us what that is.
Well, it's different kinds of double language. The first one is that she is extremely competent in choosing her words depending on our audience. And for instance, we've analyzed statistically how she associates immigration with economic issues when she's on national television to sound rational and moderate in her discourse about the topic. But when she is in a meeting with her sympathizers, she will use more of an ethnocentrist analysis of immigration as a threat to national identity. So that's one way she has this double discourse. The most interesting one that we have discovered is that she uses words with layers of meanings. And this is another way to say she's using words for their elusive qualities. For instance, she might say Muslim, but what it really means for the base of the party is immigrants, and North African immigrants at that. But if you're just, in your chair at home looking at the news and she says those words, they don't strike you as specifically racist or xenophobic, but there are 2 different levels where you can read what she says.
So Muslim is obviously a key word with different meanings. This is what you would call code words, wouldn't you?
Code words.
With different meanings. And one other one that struck me a lot was what racism means, which is very different for the majority, let's say, of the general public than for the base of the party.
Right. So recently there was a discussion about stripping out the Constitution from the word race in one of the first articles that said there should not be any discrimination against based on race. And Marine Le Pen was absolutely no, we cannot take off this word race because we are against racism and we will not be able to fight racism if we don't have this in the Constitution. And in the next line she said because there is anti-French racism that we have to fight, and anti-white racism is what she really means when she uses the word racism.
But, okay, so we understand that the base of the party will instantly interpret certain words in the way that she probably expects. But if those words don't have a particularly loaded meaning for the general public, then is she really making any inroads in the more neutral use of the meaning?
I think she works by insinuation and association. So if every single time she talks about secularism is to target the Muslim community, then she introduces in the public debate this notion that they are the only ones that are a source of problems, and that secularism is actually a way to contain a threat to French identity. So it's not that her discourse is going to win over new people because of those words, but what she does is insinuate her worldview by using common words that everybody accepts, but transforming their meaning slightly.
So is this really ultimately about not losing that traditional base of National Front ideas, while at the same time trying to appeal in the media and so on?
Yeah, the strategy is to put on a moderate face, still talk to the base and motivate them because they are what drives, the electoral success of the National Front, while making sure there's less and less of a taboo about voting for National Front.
You mentioned the word taboo, and I want to play a graphic, actually, which we had made from your book, which uses the word taboo. And what we can see in this graphic is that the words used by Marine Le Pen are actually somewhat apart from the words used by her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, who used to lead the National Front. But the two circles are much closer when it comes to the ideas, which are essentially the same. So essentially, Cécile, this is about giving her this kind of flexibility in the language.
Right. So this graphic is interesting because you can see that she chooses words that are less polemical, but the ideas behind the words are actually very close to what Jean-Marie Le Pen was saying. So the acceptability of the surface of the discourse has changed, but the message has not. So it gives her way more range to address a wider audience.
Just on one other aspect, which I found very interesting in this book, about the pirating of words, as you call it. You've already alluded to two of those things. That's laïcité, which is secularism, and also democracy. Both of those words she uses in a way that is different from what perhaps the average person would imagine that they mean. Just explain to us what that's about.
Yeah, so the National Front historically is rather anti-Republican. It opposes the parliamentary constitution and is in favor of a Christian-based ideology. So it opposed a secular view of the political system that was prominent on the left in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. With Marine Le Pen, she has suddenly, I would say, taken up this word of laïcité to be kind of what she brandishes everywhere she goes as the new champion of this French notion of separation of church and state, but also of having a neutral attitude in schools, in public services about one's opinions in religion. So what she does is she pirates the meaning of the word by giving it a very precise ideological meaning, which is laïcité or secularism is forbidding the expression of the Muslim faith in the public sphere. When you decode her discourses, this is ultimately always the meaning of laïcité in her mouth.
Do you think that politicians or the media are challenging her on the use of that word, for example, of secularism?
A little bit, but not much, because this is what's very tricky about this device of taking the words of the other, of the opponent, to turn them upside down, is that you're taken a little bit by surprise by this strategy. And at first, people don't recognize that she uses secularism in a different meaning. So people think they're talking about the same thing, and it's kind of much later in the debate, once it's too late sometimes, that you realize that it's a new meaning. So she's not really been confronted with how extensive her notion of secularism has become.
Do you think it's the job of journalists or anchors in news programs to be doing that work?
Yeah, it is their job, and it's a new job that they're going to have to take upon themselves to perform, which is to interrogate what she means when she uses one word or the other. The assumption usually when we have a conversation is that we're using the same words and they mean the same, but it's not necessarily true with politicians.
Yeah. And what we see is that she's not particularly caught on words, to come back to, I mean, in the media, that people are not saying, but when you say this word, it doesn't mean the same as when other politicians use it.
No, she's not caught on words that much because she was a new face. She's not been challenged that much on what she expresses. What surprised people is that she would talk at all about secularism, coming from the reactionary Christian conservative party she comes from. So they were kind of pleasantly surprised, and this is kind of the storytelling of the National Front right now, is that we're a new normal party, take us seriously, and people took her on her words instead of interrogating the meaning of
Presumably that's a deliberate tactic, that surprise tactic, and then later it's too late to really refocus the debate.
Right. Later, she's 25% of the votes, so it's a little too late.
Speaking of which, the departmental elections, a lot of people have been saying here that it was a disappointing second round for the National Front. They didn't win the department, of course, that they wanted, but they did get a lot of councillors. What do you make of these results?
Yeah, it's a little double-edged for the National Front, those results. I think that what they would like to remember is the first round of the elections where they finished at 25%, which is a historic score. It's 10 points more than the last departmental election, so it's a huge progress. They were only one party was that score. But the second round is a little complicated in terms of how you pick up your councillors. And whenever the National Front is against other parties in a duel, they lose usually because they still focalize a lot of anger and rejection from the rest of the political spectrum.
Does that lead you to think that there will still be this glass ceiling in 2017 in the presidential election?
Yes, and I would just not use the word glass ceiling because it implies there's some kind of discrimination almost against the National Front. And I think it's just, this is a ceiling, but it's not a ceiling that's imposed on her by the outside. It's because structurally you need alliances to win these elections in the French electoral system. And the National Front refuses alliances. They want to go on it alone. And that means that she would need 50%. To really win over the next elections.
So not a ceiling imposed by others. Very important to be aware of our words in the media. We'll have to end it there. Thank you so much, Cécile Louis, author of Marine Le Pen, Prise au mot, or Marine Le Pen, Caught on Words, and professor of French at Stanford University. That's all for this edition of The Interview here on France 24.